Hey guys, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for Animal Farm by George Orwell. Before I get into my book review, you should know that I try to do a spoiler-free book review, and that's why I have some notes below, just so I try to give away no spoilers or as few spoilers as possible. Now, for Animal Farm. This will be a hard book to review without giving away any spoilers. If I give away spoilers, it's again just minor spoilers, so I will most likely for this book have to give some minor spoilers away, just because it is a hard book to review without it. Now, before knowing about the book Animal Farm, you guys should know a little background to this book. This book was published in 1945. It was written in 43 and 44, but it was published in 1945, and that was a big time when there was a big fight of capitalism versus communism, and also what it's like living under a dictatorship versus what it's like living under changing leadership like the United States. So that is a big theme in this book because there is a humongous political overtone. And against, it's kind of basically against a lot of countries versus at that time the Soviet Union, who was ruled by the dictator Stalin. And if you even look at the flag they describe in the book Animal Farm, and then you look at the flag online, the flag that is on the book Animal Farm is basically almost identical to the Soviet Union flag. So, you could tell there's a big political undertone. But despite that being the case, remember this is a fictional book. It's kind of like a historical fiction. But, because some of the events are true, like what it's like living under a dictator, what it's like living under communism. In the book, they call it animalism. But, it does end up being true. But this is still a fictional book, so try not to get in the way too much. Even though some of it became true later, under so many communist leaders later. But, try not to let that get in the way. Anyway, so you should let that be known. But Animal Farm by George Orwell. So this book is about some overworked animals, and they get fed up, and they're on a farm. They can speak, they can do all that, but they get sick, and they decide to overthrow the farmer and take over themselves. And there's all different types of animals on this farm, including sheep, dogs, cats, birds, pigs, horse, all different type. And basically after the animals overthrow the farmer, they decide that they are going to run the farm, and that's where you get the title. It's the Animal Farm, and they're going to run it. And basically the pigs are leading the whole thing. Like, they are the leaders. Like, they are basically almost like the dictators. And I would say that this is a very interesting study, especially considering this was written in 1945, and then it continued to happen under so many dictatorships after. There were many, Stalin had already been in power. And as I said, this is a big knock against the Soviet Union. Stalin had already been in power for 20 years or more. But there were many dictatorships that happened after this book was written. And that's why I said this is a very interesting study, because they basically, George Orwell shows what happens under a dictatorship. How, the pigs are the ones that rise to the top out of all the animals, and they are the ones that decide they want to run the farm. But even among the pigs, they're fighting about, okay, who should be the absolute leader? And then they start doing things to each other to make sure that there's just one leader. So, that, and it shows what happens under communism and what happens under a dictatorship and the bad that happens, because, like, for example, like after the rebellion and then it becomes the Animal Farm, there a class system quickly develops where some animals work more, some animals work less, some animals disappear. And it's like the pigs are the ones that work the least, yet they're the ones that get the most because they're the ones that are in charge. Things like that. And it shows, again, that happens under a dictatorship. And it's pretty crazy. And how, like, the rules are different than the rebellion promised. The rebellion, when they're doing it, they will promise one thing, and then the rules change. And the rules change based off the dictator, and the rules also change to always make the dictator look great. And then if there's something goes wrong, what they will do is they will use excuses from other farms, that it's always the other farm's fault, or it's always somebody else's fault. And then it always makes the top person, the dictator in this case, look great. And again, this happens under dictators. And one of the biggest excuses I wrote, one of the biggest things they use is fear. And then all the animals just start following. They follow blindly to an extent. And they just keep following. And even though they change history and they change the rules, all this stuff starts to change. The animals just follow. And, that does happen under a dictatorship. It's sad, but it does happen. Because this book is a humongous knock against communism. And in the book, they call it animalism. But it's also a humongous knock against dictatorships. I think, George Orwell, when he wrote this book, was trying to just hammer Stalin. So, and again, that's why please try not to let history or anything like that get too in the way, because it still is a fictional book, and, and it is animals doing it, but, this is still a very interesting study, because even after Orwell wrote this book, it was banned in many countries. That's an obvious thing, but it continued to happen. It happened in China, it happened in Cuba, it happened in North Korea, it happened in Cambodia. It happened in all these countries after the book was written, and it happened almost the same thing over and over. So that's why I said this book was a very interesting study, because, I thought that this was well written overall, because it shows how people react. Even though this was animals in this case, it does show how people react, that they will promise all this stuff during the rebellion, and they will promise these rules, and then after they get in power, they change the rules, type of thing. And it shows how the animals do it, and how they use the manipulation, and all these aspects. The book Animal Farm shows a lot of that. Now, this was a shorter book. This definitely was a shorter book. Maybe he could have expanded a bit more, but then again, maybe if he expanded it, it would have just dragged. Who knows? But, it can be a good, quick read, and it definitely was fun and sad at the same time. It was both. The only things I would say, the knocks against the book, would be that for me, I always like picturing the book, but the characters and all that. It was hard for me to sometimes picture these animals. I think there was a reason he used animals, but it was hard for me to picture, dogs, cats, pigs, horses, sheep, and, all these things. It was just harder for me to do that. And it's not that I can't. I think it was just harder for the animal aspect. And then I don't know if this book is better or worse if you know history. Because if you know history, you kind of know what happens under dictatorships and communism. And if you don't know history, then you may not know what happens, and maybe it's a little better, or maybe it's just more confusing. It's tough to say. I don't know if it's better or worse, but either way, I think the book was a lot of fun for whether you know history or not. But the last thing I would say that I did not like about the book was I felt that he rushed the ending. I thought the absolute end was a great end. He left a couple pieces where he didn't answer, which I did not like, that he didn't answer a few things. But overall, I thought the last few pages were great, but I felt he rushed the final 10 to 20 pages. So, I thought he could have done a little better on that. But anyway, I think that, I thought this was a great book, and I recommend that you guys go and read it. But I'm going to give it my official rating. I always rate my books on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book, like absolutely awful. A 5 is an average book, and a 10 is phenomenal. And if it gets a 10, that should be your next read, because very few books even can get anywhere close to a 10, because a 5 is average. And I'm known to be a tough critic, to where it's hard to move up even 0.5 or 1 point. It's hard in my rating system. And this was a very hard book to read or rate because of the historical fictional aspect. That, I thought there were some great fictional aspects, but that there were things that were hard because it ended up happening over and over again in history. But, I still thought that it was a great fictional read, to where I'm going to rate this book a very solid 7 out of 10, which again, remember, a 5 is average, and it is hard to move up even 1 point. But I would rate this a solid 7. I almost did 7.5, but I thought it was a solid 7 just because of some of the other aspects I said I did not like, as in like they used animals, which was kind of odd for me to picture. I thought the ending was rushed, and I thought he could have expanded the book as a whole. But overall, a solid 7 means you guys should go out and read this book. I thought it was a great book, and it was a very, very well written, and it was just an interesting study. Anyway, if you guys have any disagreements or comments, please post it in the comments below. I hope you guys click the subscribe button, because I'm always do a lot of book reviews throughout the year. But please go out and read this book. This is Mr. V. Thank you for watching my book review. I hope you guys go and enjoy your readings.